The morning air over England was a cold, misty embrace, heavy with the smell of damp earth and aviation fuel. Inside the briefing room, a heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the rustle of maps and the low murmur of men trying to steal a last moment of normalcy. For the young men of the 8th Air Force, this was the start of another day, another roll of the dice in a war fought thousands of feet above the earth. They were the crews of the B-17 Flying Fortress, a 4-engine heavy bomber that had earned its name not just for its size, but for the legend of its resilience. The B-17 was a marvel of American engineering, a gleaming metal behemoth designed to fly deep into enemy territory, delivering a payload that would cripple Nazi Germany's war machine. Its crews, averaging just 22 years old, were its lifeblood. A collection of pilots, navigators, bombardiers, radio operators, engineers, and gunners. Their mission was simple in theory, but hellish in execution. Daylight precision bombing. The genesis of this strategy lay in the optimistic belief that American bombers, flying in tight, self-defending formations, could survive the gauntlet of enemy fighters and anti-aircraft fire without the need for fighter escorts. It was a bold, some would say arrogant gamble. The idea was that each bomber's dozen machine guns would create a lethal box of interlocking fire, a formation so dense and deadly that enemy fighters would be torn to shreds if they dared to close in. The early missions over France seemed to validate this theory. But as the war progressed and the targets moved deeper into Germany, the brutal reality of the air war began to expose the cracks in this strategy. The Germans, initially caught off guard, quickly adapted. They developed new tactics, more powerful fighters, and a terrifyingly effective network of ground defenses. For a new crew, like Sergeant Jack Gunner Riley and his bomber, the Heavenly Express, the early missions were a mix of adrenaline and naivety. Their first raid, targeting a submarine pen in Wilhelmshaven, was a blur of flashing lights and distant explosions. The Flak, the German anti-aircraft artillery, was a terrifying new experience. It was like being inside a fireworks display gone wrong, Gunner would later recall. But instead of pretty colors, it was just black puffs of smoke, each one a little piece of death waiting to find you. The flak wasn't a single, continuous threat. It was a series of violent, jarring concussions that rattled the B-17 from nose to tail, filling the air with the metallic smell of cordite and the dread of an unseen enemy. The psychological toll was immediate and immense. A crew's life expectancy was measured not in years, but in missions. The 25 Mission Club was the holy grail, the number of successful sorties required to complete a tour of duty and be sent home. But reaching that number was a pipe dream for many. The term going for a ride was a dark euphemism for a mission, and every time a crew suited up, they knew they were taking a ride to a place where many never returned. The stress began long before takeoff. The endless cycle of briefings, the stoic faces of the commanding officers, the hushed goodbyes, all contributed to a suffocating sense of fatalism. The close-knit nature of the crew was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was their only sanctuary, a family of sorts forged in shared terror. On the other, the loss of a single B-17 meant the loss of 10 friends, 10 brothers in arms whose empty chairs in the mess hall would serve as a grim reminder of the high cost of their mission. The physical strain was just as punishing. The B-17 was a bomber, not a luxury cruiser. The frigid air at 25,000 feet, where temperatures could drop to 50 degrees below zero, would freeze anything it touched. Crewmen wore electrically heated suits, but these often malfunctioned, leading to frostbite and hypothermia. The constant roar of the 4 engines, a deafening noise that could permanently damage hearing, was another relentless assault. "You couldn't hear yourself think," said Gunner. "The only way to communicate was shouting into your headset or just pointing at things." The air inside the bomber was a thin, oxygen-deprived soup, forcing the crews to rely on bulky, restrictive oxygen masks. A broken oxygen line meant certain unconsciousness, and in the case of a gunner alone in a turret, a silent, lonely death. The B-17 Flying Fortress, with its gleaming silver skin and majestic wingspan, was a beautiful machine. But it was a beautiful machine of war, a cold, unyielding environment designed for one purpose: to carry men to their deaths and hope they brought a few bombs with them. The illusion of invincibility, a comforting fiction clung to by the early bombers, shattered on a cold October day in 1943. It was the mission to Schweinfurt, a German industrial city home to a critical ball-bearing plant. The target was vital. Without ball bearings, the German war machine would grind to a halt. The cost, however, was unimaginable. The lack of long-range fighter escorts meant the B-17 formations were nakedly exposed once they crossed the English Channel. For the crew of the Heavenly Express, this mission was their 10th, and the mood was different. The naivety had been replaced by a grim resolve, an understanding that today was not just another ride, it was a potential suicide mission. As they flew deeper into Germany, the sky ahead of them became a canvas of swirling white contrails, not from their own planes, but from the rising German fighters. The enemy had been waiting. The engagement began with a terrifying ferocity. The Luftwaffe pilots, seasoned veterans of the Eastern Front, knew exactly how to break the American formations. They didn't engage head-on, where the B-17s could bring all their guns to bear. Instead, they flew in from the side or below, where the B-17s were most vulnerable, pouring a storm of cannon fire and machine gun rounds into the bombers. The sky erupted into a swirling maelstrom of violence. B-17s, once flying in tight, perfect formations, were now breaking apart, some spiraling out of control with a wing on fire, others exploding in a brilliant, silent fireball of metal and flesh. The screams of dying men over the radio, the acrid smell of burning oil and cordite, and the sight of a close friend's bomber becoming a falling torch were horrors that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. Sergeant Gunner Riley, manning his waist gun, was no longer just a spectator. He was an active participant in this dance of death. He saw a Messerschmitt Bf-109, a sleek, agile hunter, come screaming in from the left, its guns spitting fire. He squeezed his trigger, the machine gun rattling violently in his hands, sending a stream of 50 caliber rounds towards the enemy plane. He saw a flash of metal, a puff of smoke from the cockpit, and then the German fighter veered away, a silent testament to the efficacy of the B-17's defenses. But a moment later, another German plane, a Focke-Wulf FW-190, flew in from below, its twin cannons tearing a gaping hole in the bomber's left wing. The concussion was violent, the plane lurching to the side as if a giant hand had just swatted it out of the sky. "The whole plane just shook," Gunner would later say, "like a dog shaking off water. I thought for sure we were going down." Miraculously, the Heavenly Express held together, but the damage was severe. The outer left engine was on fire, a beacon of smoke and flame that made them a prime target. The bomber, now crippled, struggled to maintain its place in the formation. The pilot, Captain Miller, a man of quiet courage, made the difficult decision to leave the protection of the formation and fly a lower, more vulnerable path back to England. The journey back was a harrowing ordeal. The German fighters, like wolves picking off a wounded sheep, continued their relentless attacks. They were alone, an easy target, and the remaining crew members, their faces grimed with smoke and fear, knew it. They were no longer a crew. They were 10 men, huddled together in a falling fortress, praying for a miracle. The aftermath of the Schweinfurt mission was a turning point in the air war. The 8th Air Force had lost over 60 B-17s, a devastating blow that shattered the myth of the self-defending bomber. The high cost of daylight bombing forced a re-evaluation of tactics, leading to a temporary halt in deep penetration missions and an urgent need for long-range fighter escorts. The human cost was even greater. The number of crews that had to be replaced, the empty bunks in the barracks, the silent grief of the survivors. It was a sobering reminder that for all its technological prowess, the B-17 was still a fragile shell in a sky full of predators. The mission, in retrospect, was not a strategic victory, but a horrific lesson in the brutality of modern warfare, a lesson written in the blood and metal of the B-17 Flying Fortress crews. The memory of that day would forever be etched in the minds of the survivors, a stark and chilling testament to the horrors they faced in their flying fortress.